The first one says, "Hello, Helen. Your wisdom and kindness have kept me returning to your satsangs, both present and previous ones. You are so appreciated. I heard you talk about your past, and it brings tears to my eyes because it sounds like my present. I'm 50 now, and although I have had brief periods of lightness in my life, it's mostly been spent fretting about the future and feeling permanently defined by the past. Although I externally have a normal life, and I think people see me as a happy and friendly person who has done something with his life, I have a deep lack of confidence and almost always feel a quiet basement level alarm in my being, whispering that something needs to be fixed and that I'm different from other people and somehow unsafe. I thought I could make myself more comfortable in the present moment by meditating, so I've done it fairly intensively over the past 3 years, an hour or two a day. It's life-changing in many ways, mainly increase mindfulness and compassion for others. I still have trouble with genuine compassion towards myself, though. It's like the voice in my head holds me to an impossibly high standard, a standard that I don't expect from others. How do I love myself more and let myself off the hook of this never ending and never satisfied ego? Thank you. So this question comes from obviously one particular being, but it could be anybody's question, couldn't it? And it's probably everybody's question, because in my own journey, it was so much easier to love everyone else than to love my own self. And making that jump from, it was obvious how my mind saw myself, how my egoic sense of self thought about who I was. And that was very, very persistent. And making that jump from judging myself and blaming myself and feeling unworthy and all of that to loving unconditionally and accepting how I am right now in this moment is how I'm supposed to be, was challenging, to say the best. So it's a really important subject, isn't it? It's everyone's question. And this basement level alarm that you've spoken about in your question, it was just a constant, it's a really good way to describe it. For me, there was this constant dread. The sky was about to fall. There was just something wrong. There was just this feeling something is wrong. And also, as you said here, something is wrong with me too. There's something fundamentally wrong. I am too different from other people, and this feeling that I hear a lot of people describe, that who I project myself to be, who you would get to meet if we went for a coffee, is acceptable, fits in with everybody's expected projections. But if you really got to know me, you wouldn't like me. Something like that inside all of us, that this deep projection of self. So how do I love myself more? And how do I let myself off the hook of this never satisfied ego? Well, we have to begin to be that love right now. We can begin to be that love as much as we're capable of in this moment. And it really helps to look at the difference between the judgment and the love that we are wanting for ourselves. Judgment and blame and feeling that there's something wrong with us, all of that is based on assumptions about ourselves. So I think I know how I am, and therefore all of my desires and judgments and blaming of myself are based on how I think I am. That's what our egoic sense of self is. It's a bunch of assumptions that we keep looking for evidence for and therefore keep finding, because we're not really a separate being. We're really the infinite being, all there is. And with that comes infinite power. And when we really insist on seeing evidence that we're not good enough, then we keep seeing it over and over again. Also, while that is going on, without even having transcended that can still be going on, we can choose also as a second response. Our first response may always be to judge ourselves or blame something or feel that we're doing it wrong or that nobody accepts us or likes us, all of that. But we can begin to work on a second response. So the second response may be to be more open to see. Is there another way to see yourself that you haven't currently experienced? Is there another way to see the manifestation of you that you aren't currently recognizing? So cultivating openness as well. Not making our egoic sense of self wrong. We don't need to push against it. What would love do in this situation? We know what ego would say in this situation, what it would do. But what would love do also? Can we begin to get more interested in that? Love, the self, the noumenon, the word I use for self, awareness, beingness, presence, consciousness, the knower, all of these, the same words, the same thing. How would that real self that I am treat this situation? How would it see it? And we're so good. We really wanted to see what it is, that it's silent, that it's still, that it's not moving, it's not changing, that it is eternal, it's unlimited, it doesn't have any edges, all of that. But we can begin then to bring our attention to how does it respond to our ego? How does it respond to thoughts? What does it do with emotions? What does it do when some karmic pattern plays? And we can choose to also be more like that, to literally step into being like that too, even while the judgment is going on, the blaming is going on of our own self. Ego has impossibly high standards that we can never meet. Why? Because it is a mechanism that functions in duality. It's a mechanism, a software program to help your body grow up into adolescence and adulthood, to discern and to evaluate and to compare. It takes two things, ego, and tries to compare them, and is always looking for good and bad, which then it says is wanted and not wanted. So it compares two things. That's all it can do. It doesn't have any capacity to do otherwise. And therefore, it is always going to be comparing. So it will be comparing how you are right now in this moment with how it thinks you should be. And again, how it thinks you should be and how it sees you in this moment is based on what it thinks is true. A bunch of assumptions. So ego thinks it knows who you are, and then it has this imaginary picture of you in the future, both of which are built on assumptions or lies that are not really true about you. So you can never fulfill its expectations. You can never reach that place where you feel good enough, where you feel adequate, where you feel awakened enough if we keep perceiving through ego. Why? Because we're trying to recognize the one being that we are right here in this manifestation as you, as your particular mind and body through a mechanism that sees and compares two things. Is that ever going to work? Not so much, is it? And even if you somehow manage to live up to this imaginary image that you have of yourself, what this self-portrait I have of myself, that when I get to this point, I'll like and love myself. Immediately there'd be something else. Ego would have to project more. Okay, you need more of this now. You would never be satisfied, as you said here. So just understanding the difference between what love would do and what ego would do, that they're two different modes you can experience yourself through. Love wants to, the self wants to understand. It wants to understand why something works. And remember, as a small child watching my granddad, he used to have this really old car. And every now and again he never drove it anywhere, but he would just take apart the engine piece by piece. And I'd watch him doing this over and over again. He'd put it back together again. And he'd just be so happy doing this. And of course, none of us really understood what he was doing. Why just take it apart and put it back together again? Why do this thing over and over again? So I finally asked him one day and said, you don't ever drive the car? Don't you want to take it out once you've put it back together? And he just said, I just love taking things apart to see how they work. And there was I didn't get the significance of that at the time. When I really began to wake up, I really recognized this is what we need to begin to do with our egoic sense of self. This is what love would want to do, wouldn't it? It would want to open up and experience, why is ego the way it is? Can it really see the truth? Can it really see the one being? What are its limitations, ego? What is it even capable of achieving what it wants to achieve? All from a place without blame, just actually wanting to see what is it that sustains my egoic sense of self? And is there also another way to perceive myself? So as you begin to see that the reason we can have more compassion for other beings than ourselves is usually because we don't have so many portraits in our head about them, projections in our head about them. It's easier to accept someone else as they are right now in this moment through ego. But even then, ego's probably comparing yourself to that other being. Well, they seem to be further ahead than you. They don't seem to be struggling as much as you are, etc. And on it goes. Can we really use this mechanism of ego to perceive what we actually are? Of course, we can't with the formlessness, because you can't see empty, vast, spacious nothingness with your senses and your mind. You can only see it directly. Awareness can see awareness. But then when we look at our mind and body, the first arising, our life, our individuality, our friendships, our relationships, our pathway to awakening, all of it, we automatically switch back to perceiving through ego. So then cultivating this habit to want to understand, why isn't it working? Why is it never ending? Why aren't I reaching peace through this mechanism? And is it possible actually? So love wants to understand. Love wants to take apart the ego to see how it works. Not in a forceful way. It wants to get in there with a spanner and really have a look and see. And it's the opposite, isn't it, of judgment? It's the opposite of assumption. It's the opposite of what ego does, which is to compare two things. Let me look at this thing as it actually is. And how many of us really look at our ego with these loving eyes? If we wait for ego to stop doing what it does, it will never, ever end. If, as well as that egoic thing going on that we all do to ourselves, we could begin to cultivate, why is this happening? Why does ego feel so sure of this? Why does it always hold me to a high standard? When I really began to do this in myself, it began to become clearer and clearer that I'd been expecting ego to do something it's not capable of doing. I've been asking my egoic sense of self to look at my body mind that are always changing and growing and all of that, and to see the essence of it underneath, the perfection that's already there. And it's not capable of, because you can only compare here where it thinks you are with where it thinks you need to be, which is not at all where you actually are and where you actually will be. They're two different things. So understanding ego's limitations, wanting to really understand it, stop treating it, all of us treat it like the enemy, like it just needs to be somehow eliminated, killed or squashed or destroyed or something. And I tried that for a very long time and it didn't work, and probably having the same experience right now. So let's try to see if we can come to want to understand this mechanism. Yes, it causes us suffering, but the most suffering that we'll ever experience is by treating ego how ego would treat it. The self, the silence, the presence, the consciousness, the witness. It is just watching, just listening, just allowing unconditionally the ego to do its thing. And it says both perspectives are valid. I can be judging myself and I can be loving myself at the same time. Which one takes precedence is which one I cultivate more. And as I choose to love my ego, it will literally melt. It's held together by a bunch of assumptions and the pushing against it that we all do. We're all saying quite violently in our energy, you should not be here. You're here, but you should not be here, to our ego, to our mind. And your word is law because you are the infinite being. Whatever you say and mean with your energy, you're going to keep experiencing. So when we energetically say, I understand, ego, why you feel this way, but I don't necessarily have to agree with you. It's fine if you're here or not, and I'll only suffer if I'm pushing against you. Then it begins to melt. When we say, you should not be here, you are the cause of my suffering, then we're sustaining it in that. How to love it then, to want to understand, to want to really come to see why it works the way it does. Take it apart with a spanner. You don't have to, this is one thing you don't have to put back together again when you're finished. Oh, you can if you want to, but you'll probably find you don't want to. And just give it some love. It's doing the best it can, and somehow your egoic sense of self has got this crazy idea that it's responsible for your awakening, and it can't fully achieve that. The best it can do is compare itself with the self and conclude that they're two, and they're not really. That's as far as it can take you there through no fault of its own. So I hope that's given you some way to move forward this question. Just don't wait for the judgment to stop before you start loving yourself. Do it anyway. How would the self see me? How would the silence see these thoughts? How would an awakened being see my egoic sense of self, my problems, my fears, all of that? You can step into that right now, can't you? Even if you have no clue of the answers to those questions I've just said, just wanting to see is enough. You begin to. Most of us spend so much energy pushing against our egoic judgment of ourselves, waiting for it to go before we begin to love and understand it. And it's never, ever going to work that way.